Welcome to the Redbird Report, your destination for the latest on the St. Louis Cardinals. Here are your hosts, BK and T-Bone.
Welcome into the Redbird Report alongside Tanner Henderickson. I'm Brandon Kiley. It's a new podcast we're doing around here at 101 ESPN. It'll be me, BK, and him, T-Bone, coming to you weekly, every single week throughout the Cardinals season, and hopefully beyond, as long as there's a good reception to this, talking about the St. Louis Cardinals. It's going to be everything that we talk about in our own personal time, T-Bone. It'll just be recorded now. We'll press record instead of doing that off of the air. So I'm looking forward to this. It's something that I have always wanted to be a part of here around the station, is doing something related to the Cardinals beyond just what we do on the air. What we do on the air is amazing, but you're limited to typically 12-minute segments. This is going to be, 45 minutes, however long we decide to go every week. Long, extended thoughts about whatever is taking place at any given time related to the Cardinals. So I'm super excited to do this. I hope you guys are excited to give it a listen. It's something me and T-Bone have talked about for, 3 or 5 years at this point in time.
Yeah, this should be fun. And, when you live alone, you get a lot of time to think about the St. Louis Cardinals, especially when that's your job. So I typically bring some of this to our meetings, pre-show meetings, and we talk and we talk and we talk, and it's never recorded. So now's a great chance for everybody to kind of get inside of our brains. Now, that's a little bit scary. I won't lie. It's a little bit scary. But we're going to do our best, and, hopefully the Cardinals are good, too, and they make it a little bit fun for us to cover along the way.
All right, so you guys know who we are from the station. We're going to be the same people here. It'll just be extended thoughts as opposed to in bite-sized segments. So let's get right into this, T-Bone. This is the week that the Cardinals had to make roster moves, and they made some that were surprising, to put it mildly. Victor Scott II. I think a lot of Cardinals fans wanted him to be a part of this roster, but did not believe they would actually do it. Well, he is now on the roster, and the expectation is that he will start every day. I guess basically the tune-up game that they played, we're recording this on Tuesday. They played that game on Monday. He was batting 8th in the lineup and was starting in center field. So I expect that to look the way that it is on Thursday for opening day as well. That has a trickle-down effect. With Scott being on the roster, it means somebody had to lose out on playing time. And this is maybe the thing out of the entire offseason that surprises me the most. It appears that Nolan Gorman is going to be the one that misses out on playing time because Victor Scott is here. So Burleson was batting in the lineup 5th at the designated hitter spot, and Nolan Gorman was nowhere to be found in this lineup. The other roster moves, and we'll get to these as well. Liberatore is going to be a part of your starting rotation starting on opening day. He will be your 5th starter. Matz will start out in the bullpen, but they said that's basically just a fungible way of getting him innings until they get to that 13 games and 13 days stretch. Then he will go into a 6-man rotation, and they'll decide what to do then. McGreevy is going down to AAA. So those were the big roster decisions. Let's start with the obvious, which is the Scott one, and basically what that means for the offense. I couldn't have been more surprised by this. And I mentioned this on the on-air side of things. I wouldn't have done it. And I know that's unpopular, and I get why people want Victor Scott to be here. I also, just selfishly, want to watch Victor Scott play baseball. I like everything about what he is. He's fun. He is fast. He plays good defense. If he is the fully formed version of himself, he also had some pop in the bat as well. But, man, he had a great spring training last year as well, and it didn't translate to the regular season. So I would have given him more time. He's younger. He can still go down to AAA, get some confidence down there, go down there for a month. Let's see what it looks like with both Burleson and potentially at that point in time, Donovan, Gorman, all of those guys getting those opportunities at the big league level. Noopar starting in center field. It wouldn't have been good defensively at all, but it just allows you time to get answers. And they decided to forego that with Gorman in favor of Victor Scott. I'm surprised by it. I think it speaks to where they're at right now with Nolan Gorman, which means that they're basically where most of this fan base is with Nolan Gorman now. What did you make of that choice?
Yeah, well, first off, way to start the podcast with a bang by saying Scott should have been down in AAA, in your opinion. But I kind of like their decision. Now, I was surprised they did it because the Cardinals typically are the path of least resistance. And to your point, their path of least resistance was, hey, let's tell Scott we need to see a month of this in AAA. Then we can go with Noopar in center field, and we can get Gorman at bats. But I think it's twofold for me. One, it is they were probably out on Gorman in the offseason. And now it wasn't out enough to where it was, okay, we should trade this guy because they still see some potential in there. And if they traded Arenado, it would have been one of those where it was, okay, we do now have a spot for him. But I think now they were at a spot where it was, and I said this on air side too, I felt like he had the shortest leash of all those guys going into the season. And they said in spring training, he hasn't shown us enough. And the second side of this for me is, I think Victor Scott earned this, and I'm glad to see them go with this. I mean, you mentioned last year's spring training, and they got caught in a spot which was bad, which was, hey, he's not going to be up here, even though he had a good spring. We've got Carlson, and then Walker ran into Carlson and ended the hope of that, and they were forced to bring him up. The one thing that did really change for him, going from last spring to where we are today and seeing him in spring this year, was his slug was there. I mean, you mentioned he hit the ball hard last year. His slugging percentage in spring training last year was .366. For context, where it was this year, .721.
Whew.
So
double
that. So he has shown not only is he hitting the ball hard still, he also is actually putting on some real slugging numbers and hitting for power. It's one thing to hit the ball hard for singles, which we saw Walker do 2 years ago when he had that good year where everything was on the ground when he hit it hard. It's another to lift the ball. And you saw Scott do that with his 4 home runs in spring training, didn't hit any 2023. So because of that, I like the fact that they said, hey, look, this kid's did everything that we said of him. Sure, this is going to complicate things. We're being honest with ourselves. We were probably out on Nolan Gorman, and he was a guy that was probably going to lose his job potentially a month or two into the season. Let's carry Scott. Let's play him in center field. And the other thing, and I know we'll talk about McGreevy here in a second, the other thing that you have with Scott's position is it's not clogged right now. That's the one thing they have an issue with on the starting pitching side that led to McGreevy going down. That's not the case in center field. You can say, oh, they've got Ciani, or they could play Nootbaar there. Look, Nootbaar's not a center fielder. You saw that in spring. There was a ball that was sitting
I do agree with that. I do not think that's his long-term position. It is a means to an end. Starting Nootbaar in center field was about getting Gorman the at-bats more than it was about finding out if he can actually play the position capably, which I think the answer is probably no.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's where you would get into that conclusion. But there's nobody that you really say that guy is clogging that spot, so we have to send Scott down. And that's why I think it is a good message to say, hey, you earned this. Go out there. We'll give you a month. And if he's not hitting in a month, then you know what? You can send him down. And his ceiling for me, I don't think he's going to be what this player was a year ago because, well, this guy was awesome a year ago and was top 10 in MVP voting. Jarren Duran of the Boston Red Sox. Yeah. I mean, that guy can hit. He's got speed. You look at what he did two years ago in 2023. 295 average is probably a little high for him, but he's a doubles machine, and he gets on base. He causes havoc.
Triples machine last year, too.
Yeah, and that's what put him in the MVP voting. Yeah. 2 years ago, not so much triples guy. Just had 2 compared to 14 the next season, which is wild. But that is who I think is kind of the comp for him, is can he become Jarren Duran? And if he is, well, that really changes the outcome for the St. Louis Cardinals. I'm not saying it has to be that this year, but in the long run.
We'll get to the lineup construction here in a little bit. Let's go ahead and do that now, talking about Victor Scott and kind of where he can fit into that mix. He, again, was batting 8th in the lineup the other day. If that's what he becomes, he's your leadoff hitter. And I think that's what's so exciting and so enthralling about Victor Scott is that he has the potential to be so much more than just a speed guy. His bat played in a way down in the minor leagues where it's like, okay, could he hit for average? Yeah, checks that box. Can he get on base? Well, yeah, that's something that actually differentiates him from many of these other players. He takes his walks, which is hard to do when the opposing pitcher knows if I put this guy on, it's problematic because he could steal 100 bags down in the minor leagues, which he does. But they still found a way. He still found a way to have that batter's eye and to be disciplined down in the minor leagues and to take the pitch that he needed. So he's got the on-base percentage. Okay, cool. And he's got a little bit of pop. So you add all of this together, it's like, okay, well, that is a profile that we can build around. He's also extremely young still. So I get why they want to find out what this is. And I get pushing him. But we have seen so often from the Cardinals in recent years an issue where they run into rushing these guys. And they bring up Dylan Carlson during that COVID year, and he's pushed to be a cleanup hitter. Now. We've got to have it now. Well, maybe he wasn't ready for that at that point in time. And I think that did hinder his development a bit. Now, the next year he comes back. He's asked to be a little bit less. He has a really good season. And then it's like, okay, he's ready. He's arrived. He's a star now. And no, comes back, has a down year. The injury starts to take over, and now he's never been the same player again. You see the same thing happen with Jordan Walker. They get excited by a 2-week stretch of what he did in spring training. It didn't matter that he struggled the rest of the way. He was coming to the big league club, and boom, we've seen what happens up and down nature of his seasons over the last couple of years. Mason Wynn's really the one guy that hasn't had that, where people were ready for him to be up quicker than they brought him up a couple of years ago. They finally get that little stretch down the end of the season 2 years ago, and then last year is up for the entirety of the year. I would like to see them approach Victor Scott in a way now where it is a little bit more patience. I want to see them do that with J.J. Weatherholt. I like that they're doing that with some of the pitching side of things now. They decided not to do that. And they're pushing it with Victor Scott, and they're buying into what they saw in spring and saying, this is real. There is no doubt in their mind, apparently, according to what they're doing with their actions, not their words, this is real, and he's going to be a legit player for us. Man, what that means, though, is that you no longer get answers on Nolan Gorman. And I know in this audience right now, there are probably many of you that are listening and saying to yourself, I don't care. I know what Nolan Gorman is. He's had 1,000 at-bats at the major league level. How much more do you need to find out? He strikes out a ton. He's going to hit for a little bit of power, but he doesn't have a great defensive position. It's not a player that I need to see more of. Cool. How are we going to feel if a year from now, Nolan Gorman is starting at third base for the New York Yankees, and he goes out there and hits 30 home runs for them, and it's 220 on the season. It's still the same player, striking out 30+% of the time, but he hits 30 bombs for them with left-handed pop and ends up being a meaningful piece for a playoff roster. That's the thing to me that I'm struggling with right now, T-Bone, is what this means as the trickle-down effect. I still wanted to learn more about Nolan Gorman, and you have opted out of that. You have decided that is not necessary for us. We don't need to see what it is, even though the entire offseason, the goal number 1, 2, and 3, according to the Cardinals themselves, in their words, we got to trade Nolan Arenado. Well, why? Why do you have to trade Nolan Arenado? It was to get this dude playing time. That's why you needed to trade him. It was twofold. One, the money, which is apparently not that big of a deal now, according to them. And two, playing time for Nolan Gorman, which you have now said publicly with your actions, we actually don't need to find out what Nolan Gorman is. So this is where there are so many mixed messages that it almost has me like, I'm twisted up into a pretzel trying to figure out, okay, then what are we doing here? What is the North Star of the season that we are being guided by? And it seems to me, maybe it's winning. Maybe it is about winning in the first portion of the year, and that's why Victor Scott's up, because they view him as the one that can help them win more games in April than Nolan Gorman can.
And I see that's where I get kind of twisted into a pretzel, because if you're talking about wanting to win now, then I would think that you would want to be more cautious with Victor Scott, right? Take him out of the pressure situation, because that's what they kind of did with Wynn in 23, I guess it was.
Sure.
They thought that team was good. He was still a little bit behind and need time in AAA. But if you're trying to win, though there is an argument to be had of, hey, if Scott is ready, that is our best center fielder, best defensive center fielder, best offensive capable center fielder. But I would think if the Cardinals were trying to win, they would be taking more of the approach of, well, we got to be more cautious with a Victor Scott, maybe not put him in the pressure cooker that is St. Louis. But if you were going the reverse of that, which was, hey, kind of a retool year, transition year, trying to figure out at-bats for guys, though, yeah, we are kind of pushing Gorman off to the side, then I could look at it and say, well, you know what, I don't care if Victor Scott sinks or swims at the big leagues, because it's time for him to see big league pitching on a consistent basis and try and figure it out here at the big league level. But that's where, once again, that I get twisted into the pretzel is, okay, well, I don't fully understand what the goal of the season is, because what you're saying about Gorman, that was the offseason goal. Now, in their defense, kind of, I wonder if they, it's one thing we hear. I mean, we go to Cardinals winter warm-up every year, and all the players speak, and, oh, my offseason's been great. My swing adjustments, perfect. Me, Brant Brown, buddies. And then you go into spring training, you go, well, what was that? That adjustment didn't look like
Sure.
it worked. And I think that might be what happened with Gorman, was they looked at Gorman and said, boy, we kind of thought the offseason was going to be about getting him playing time. And now we look at him, and I understand spring training is not the end-all be-all. For some guys it is, and he fell into that category. I think they looked at him and said, man, he's not – I don't know if he's that guy for us. So it's okay, since we are clearly wanting to win, it's probably better for us to carry Victor Scott and not put Gorman in the lineup.
He just got jumped. That's what happened here. Alec Burleson leapfrogged him. Brendan Donovan is a better player than him. Lars Nootbaar has been a more productive player than Nolan Gorman, and now Victor Scott just put him in front of Nolan Gorman on the pecking order of what they view as the core group of players for the team for the foreseeable future. So I just find the Nolan Gorman discussion to be fascinating, because he was the guy right?
Yeah.
There's this left-handed thump that could be the middle of the order bat that this team has been severely lacking, and almost every playoff team that you see that has success year to year has a guy that profiles like this, strikes out. Like, Jock Peterson is the prototypical player that fits into this criteria.
100%.
And he's been on seemingly every World Series contender for a 5-year stretch. And yet, the Cardinals had the opportunity to develop that player, basically did, even though it's not a fun profile to watch day to day over the course of 162. And they said, actually, we're good. We don't like this profile of player. And I do wonder if that's going to influence what they decide to go with in the future in the draft. Like, if there is a bunch of swing and miss for a player, maybe they decide to avoid that entirely. And especially when you get to free agency, these are players that I think they should probably avoid unless it's on a 1-year, $5 to $7 million deal. They just clearly don't value this.
That I agree. What's interesting about them devaluing it now is, forget just even from the left side, right? Who's the guy that's got power like Nolan Gorman? Like, if you pluck Gorman from this lineup, say he was going to hit 6th. I mean, that was probably his best spot in the lineup. Who's hitting for home run power in this lineup? Because this is not a good slugging team. Sure, but I feel like you wrote him in pen, right? Like, I feel like you wrote him in pen for what he's going to be.
Gorman?
Who's replacing that Gorman power? And my answer is, I have no idea.
I think it's the old Moneyball thing, right? Like, the only way that we can do this is in the aggregate. So Gorman doesn't end up being placed into the lineup day to day. Okay, what does that mean? Well, it means you need 3 more home runs this year out of Lars Nootbaar. It means you need another 2 out of Brendan Donovan. And now Alec Burleson, who could have been a 20 home run hitter, maybe you need him to be more of a 25 home run hitter. And Victor Scott, I think maybe he fits into this criteria as well. If you were previously expecting, hey, Victor Scott's like a 5 to 10 home run guy, maybe now it is, we need Mason Wynn's first year where he had 15 home runs for us. We need Victor Scott to be able to replicate that. And speaking of Mason Wynn, we need him to hit 20 this year. So you put a little bit more on every single individual's plate. Is it fair to any of those guys that you're doing that? No, because it's artificial. It's based upon a decision that had nothing to do with what they're capable of. But this is where you're at as a team, and you need to produce offensively. I don't know, man. It's going to be interesting. It could also be they get those runs, because really it's about how many runs do you score, right? That's what the whole Moneyball idea was, is if you get on base, you create fewer outs, you can score more runs, even if it's not with the batting average side of things, right? I think what they would say is, well, we are going to have more guys that get on base at a higher clip. We're just going to consistently have more runners on, and if we have those runners on, as opposed to Nolan Gorman, who is going to be striking out 40% of the time that he goes to the plate, it gives us a better chance to score more runs. And oh, by the way, we've got a guy now that can steal 40 bags for us this year. So not only is he getting on, but he's getting himself over, which manufactures some of that slug that we talk about. He ends up standing on second without another guy needing to hit him over. Boom, now we go to the bottom of the lineup. We reverse it back up to the top. Nootbaar's hitting a single. That guy's scoring from second. So that's what I think the hope is, but it's easier said than done.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Anytime you start to try and replace something on the aggregate, it never works. And like the team I'm going to bring up, I know this is a Cardinals podcast. Remember when the Blues let Petra walk? And I'm not saying Gorman is a Alex Pietrangelo, but he is kind of a unicorn in this organization for his pure power. Anytime you try to replace this stuff, it doesn't work. And I don't care how fast you want to play. You know a team that's been playing fast lately and hasn't been having success? The Cincinnati Reds.
Yeah, I was about to bring them up.
What are they winning? And they're trying this whole like Moneyball thing, and they're getting guys on base, and they're kind of trying to go first to third. Now they keep hoping for more power from guys. I just don't see how this has success, because when I think of modern baseball, whether you love it or hate it, it is, do you strike guys out from the pitching staff, and do you just slug? And that is the biggest difference. You saw the Cardinals last year. They didn't have great speed, but they were more of a single happy team. And what would happen? They weren't scoring a lot of runs, and the offense was the thing that dragged them down.
All right, I want to look this up, because you just said something that made me wonder. Like, who were the teams that succeeded last year with a lack of slugging percentage in their lineup? Because I don't think this is going to be a lineup that has a great slugging percentage. It's hard to foresee a scenario in which that's the case. Here were the bottom half of the league in slugging percentage. We can go through these really quickly and talk about which one of them ended up having success. So San Francisco, no. Cleveland, they ended up having some success last year. The Cubs, the A's,
no.
The Cardinals,
no.
Toronto,
no.
Cincinnati,
no.
Detroit.
Okay,
Detroit had some success.
Yeah.
Texas, Miami,
No.
Seattle,
No.
Washington,
No.
Pittsburgh,
No.
the Angels,
No.
the Rays,
No.
and the White Sox.
No. Doesn't
The
work.
entire bottom
It-
half of the league in slugging percentage basically missed the playoffs.
Those two teams that did make the playoffs, think of Cleveland. What were they? Everybody knew they struggled offensively. Pitching. They had an unbelievable bullpen last year.
Yep.
And to the credit of the Cardinals, why did they finish above 500? They had incredible bullpen and a rotation that was stable. And then you mentioned the Tigers. What they had Tariq Skubal, who carried their rotation, and once again, they had a good bullpen. So if you're not hitting for power, you have to be unbelievably elite when it comes to your arms.
That's the thing. It's a sliding scale. You could be bad at something. Like, there are teams, the Phillies in the past, Dave Dombrowski's entire history is, yeah, I don't do bullpens. Not my thing. Now, he's trying to fix that right now. But in the past, you look back at what he did with Detroit. Every year, every single person that watched baseball for 10 minutes over the course of the season knew what was going to happen. Their bullpen would implode in the postseason.
Yep.
It was going to happen. Unbelievable offense and great starting rotation. Zero bullpen. They found a way to consistently make it deep into the playoffs. They just eventually
it
met their
caught up
match.
to them.
Yeah. So you can have success this way, but it requires you to be great elsewhere. And this gets to our other conversation, where we got to talk about the pitching.
Good.
Because the Cardinals are making some decisions over there as well. And this is where things get very confusing to me. I think that the lineup, while there are some mixed messages and some confusing decisions, and the Nolan Gorman of it all is weird to me, and it feels like it was very abrupt in terms of them deciding this guy is the future of our third base position, to this guy doesn't have a spot in our lineup. That happened in like 3 months. The pitching side of things to me is just weird and confusing, and I don't understand a lot of it. And yet, I kind of think they ended up in the right place.
Oh, that's so Cardinals-y.
You've got Sonny Gray at the front end of your rotation, who had some serious problems in spring training. Velo is down, not striking guys out the same rate that he did, walking the world seemingly.
Apparently has the flu.
It's not good. So hopefully that all figures itself out in, I don't know, the next 48 hours. Miles Michaelis is back. Nothing you could do there. It is what it is. People will get mad about it. He's getting paid $18 million. He's going to pitch for you. It is what it is. You have Eric Fetty back. Let's put a pin in that one, because that's the one decision in the offseason that continues to befuddle me. And then, beyond that, you've got Andre Palante, who is always going to be a part of this rotation. And Matthew Liberatore, the surprise, is your fifth starter. Again, trickle-down effect. You've got to, if you're going with Liberatore, means somebody else is not in your rotation. That somebody is Steven Matz, kinda. He is going to be out of the rotation for like 10 days. And then they're going to slot him in as a part of a 6-man rotation for 2 weeks. And then it's kind of confusing on the messaging of, I'm not sure what happens next. I think it's we'll wait and see. If everybody's healthy, we'll make the decision then. But they're making it abundantly clear, hey, this is not a trial run for Matthew Liberatore, so he's not at risk of losing his spot at the rotation, which makes me wonder, then who is? Like, are you pulling Miles Michaelis to the bullpen? I don't think so. You decided not to trade Eric Fetty. He's not moving. Andre Palante has earned this opportunity. He's not going anywhere. So whatever. Steven Matz, I suppose, is going to be banished to the bullpen. They just don't want to say that right now. Michael McGreevy is down in AAA. And much like the decision with Scott, I was surprised by, and I would have kept him in AAA. I like this move. I think it's the right call. But it's cold-hearted. Michael McGreevy has nothing to prove in AAA. Nothing. But he's got to be down there, because if not him, then who is your sixth starter? If Steven Matz is indeed going to be going to the bullpen, and I think that's probably their plan, well, he would have to then be stretched out again if there is an injury 3 to 4 weeks into the season. You don't want to do that. We've seen this team do it at the big league level. It doesn't work.
They finally learned their lesson.
A disaster. So if you're not going to do that, and you're pulling from AAA into the depth there, and you don't have McGreevy to do that from, because Liberatore's in the bullpen, McGreevy's a fifth starter, you're going with Matz and McGreevy and Liberatore in the bullpen. Who is the sixth starter? I guess it's Quinn Matthews.
It's probably Graceffel, but they clearly don't believe in that.
And they seem to view him as more of a bullpen arm at this point in time than they do a rotation arm. So I think it's the right call. It's just, it's frustrating that this is a retool and you've got a young arm that you think is ready to go for the big league level, and he's not a part of it. If you would have traded Eric Fetty in the offseason, he would have then been given a spot in the rotation potentially. Again, I don't know that that's a good situation, because you are still without a sixth starter down at the AAA level. I liked your idea of trading Eric Fetty and bringing in Kyle Gibson on a one-year deal like the Baltimore Orioles just did at $5 million. You save a little bit of money. You get whatever the return is, which I think might have been more significant than people were expecting for Eric Fetty. And then you go into the season with basically what you had, but you plug in Kyle Gibson instead of Eric Fetty. And I don't think you get all that much worse. Maybe it's a slight downgrade, but it's that same consistency that you're hoping for from Fetty. It's a super average, super mid rotation. There's nothing exciting other than Sonny Gray with this. I think I kind of like what they ended up with, though. Matthew Liberatore, I don't think is going to work as a starter, but you might as well find out. This is your last opportunity to do so.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think Libby's going to work. I like where they ended up with the rotation, even if they got there in a weird way. If you are in this transition year, I wanted to see a young arm alongside Palante, right? I just assumed Palante was always in that spot, but I wanted to see a young arm with him. Now, I didn't expect Liberatore to be in that conversation come the beginning of the offseason of last year, but I like that they got there because at least this is supposed to be a year of getting answers. Yeah. And they're trying that on the offensive side for a couple of guys, like Newbar staying healthy, Walker, can he hit? We thought Gorman, we'll see, and Burley, can he repeat last year? I like that they're saying, hey, you know what? McGreevy's blocked. He was blocked either way. He was blocked either from Liberatore or he was blocked from Steven Matz. So, like, when they sent him down and he earned a spot in the rotation come spring training, the reason I felt it was different from Victor Scott was, hey, we've got all these guys here, right? It's hard for us to put you into this rotation. So I don't mind that they sent him down. But I like the fact that if you're going to send him down, throw Matz in the bullpen. He's a lost asset at this point. He's going to carry no value for you, and he's off the books by the end of the season. So at least figure out what you have in Liberatore. And maybe a month in you say, well, what were we thinking? Then you can put Matz back in because he's going to be stretched out. He's going to be starting, and that's fine by me. I like the fact that McGreevy's at AAA because, again, for me, that decision on McGreevy is not about what Michael McGreevy is doing. It is about protecting Quinn Matthews. And he's got the highest ceiling of probably any prospect in their system that is close right now. J.J. Weatherholt's probably higher than his, but he's going to be starting at AA this season, so I don't think he'll be here this year. But for me, Quinn Matthews will be here this year. And I want to protect him for the first 2 months, kind of get his feet wet at AAA in Memphis, work on developing his stuff, and I don't want him rushed. And now that you have McGreevy down, he can be called up as the sixth starter. I don't believe Graceffo to me will be in the bullpen by the time we get to July, but at least he's there as protection as the seventh guy at this point in time. But that's what the McGreevy decision for me was, hey, I get it. He should be up here. He's good enough to be up here. His ceiling, though, is a number 4. And with that guy being down at AAA, you're not really stunting any development for him. Yeah, he doesn't belong there, but he's protection. And that's what they need right now so they don't get stuck in spots where they've been in the last, probably since I've been here in St. Louis covering the Cardinals, which is every year you get 2 months into the season, you go, hold up, we don't have enough pitching. Oh, boy, what do we do? And then they panic, and they do all kinds of weird decisions like yo-yoing back and forth Matthew Liberatore, Jordan Hicks starting spring training as a bullpen arm, and then, oh, hold on, we got to stretch him out on the fly. That's why I like the decision with McGreevy, because you've finally got a plan in place for your pitching.
They have a hole in their pitching development right now. That's what's happening, because you have guys that are ready. They're ready at the big league level. And then you have guys that are like a few months away. Yeah. And that might be Quinn Matthews. Quinn Matthews is leading the charge in that regard. Maybe Gordon Graceffo. If things go differently this year than they did a year ago, he looks healthy. Maybe he's a few months away from being ready for the big league level. And then you have other guys that are like a year or two away from the big league level. I'm thinking of Cooper Jerpy in that regard. I'm thinking of Tink Hintz, hopefully, in that regard. TK Roby maybe could fit into that criteria. So you've got these waves that are eventually coming, similar to what it used to be for the Cardinals. Mm-hmm. But right now, as of today, going into the season, you just don't have that depth. You are missing your, like, Tyler Lyons. That's what they're missing right now, is a guy that can come up, start 15 games for you of just the most average starts you could possibly ask for, and you go, whew, that could have been a nightmare.
At least we got 5 innings.
You got 5 innings of 3-run ball, and you've got a chance to win that day's game. That's what they're missing right now, and some of that is on them. They did not develop, most of it is on them. They didn't develop those starters. That was supposed to be Zach Thompson. It just has not worked. It was supposed to be Dakota Hudson, maybe. Obviously, that did not work. Supposed to be Drew Rahm. He's dealt with injuries and was ineffective when given the opportunity.
And if we're honest, I don't think they believed in Rahm.
Probably. But you add all of these things up, and it just puts you into a really tough situation where, I'm sorry, McGreevy, but you've got to be that guy. You've got to be our Tyler Lyons, at least to begin this season. I think Michael McGreevy will be in this rotation for the majority of the year. I don't know whose place he will be taking, but it will probably be due to an injury, and that's just the reality of the way that baseball works in 2025. So if you're Michael McGreevy, I have to imagine this is incredibly frustrating and highly disappointing because there is nothing left for you to learn or to develop at the AAA level. But take it for what it is. Last year, you were great down there. You got a couple of opportunities, made good on them. Do it again. Go down there, hone your craft for a couple of months, and when you get that shot, never go back down. Never go back down to AAA and see what you can do this year at the major league level. All right. So that's where things stand on the roster. We've made mention of the fact that this is kind of a weird year for the Cardinals a few different times. The expectations for this season are hard to judge. I thought Gorman was going to be a part of this. And if you're a Blues fan, I think there are a lot of similarities between where the Blues were going into the season and where the Cardinals are going into the season. Yes, it's about success, but also it's really about the young players and do you get positive returns on them. For the Blues, been overwhelmingly successful. Almost all of their young players have exceeded the expectations going into the season. For the Cardinals, we've already seen one of the young guys that you were hoping to get positive answers on. It's been a disaster with Nolan Gorman. He's not playing. I wanted to ask you this, T-Bone. Something that you brought up the other day. Can this Cardinal season be considered a success if both Gorman and Walker don't deliver on the hope that they were previously expected to bring?
I think it can be. I think it can be a success for the Cardinals, long as you get answers on other guys. Like when I think about the Cardinals season, look, I've made this publicly known. I'm very skeptical of a bounce back season from Jordan Walker to get back to where he was 2 years ago, where he was like 15% above league average, because you're talking about almost a 30-point swing in his OPS plus. Doesn't happen very often for guys. Not in the fashion of, hey, this guy was really good for a year, then had a really bad year, and then bounces back. We've seen guys struggle at the big leagues and figure things out, thinking of like Mason Wynn, for example, in his 1 month kind of sample size. But I think it can be a success because when I bring up that question, I'm thinking Herrera takes a step forward. And you look at Ivan Herrera and you go, okay, maybe he's not the everyday catcher for us, but we know his bat plays at the big leagues. We'll figure out where to play that guy. Whether it's DH, first baseman of the future moving forward, we'll figure that out. But we've got a bat that can hit 300 and has got some doubles power in there. And then I look at like Nootbaar and I say, okay, Nootbaar's healthy. What does a Nootbaar fully healthy season look like? Probably looks like Brandon Nimmo. And Brandon Nimmo got paid by the New York Mets, man. Like that's a guy that can really play in any lineup for you. That's going to be about 15 to 20% above league average. He's going to get on base at a good clip, which is helpful since they're going to have him as the leadoff man to start the year, it looks like. And he's got some pop. He's got 20 home run pop in that bat. And he hits the ball super hard. I think he should hit for a better average than he does, but we'll see. I think that's a successful season because that's two answers on two pivotal pieces within the organization. Now, maybe none of those guys are middle-of-the-order bats like you thought maybe Jordan Walker could end up becoming, but at least you know then, right? And then you have a plan to build moving forward. If you end up leaving the season going, maybe it is Walker, okay, Herrera didn't hit, and now you're looking at it going, we don't know what to think of most of these guys, that's a problem. And the biggest issue for the Cardinals that has hit them in the past, forget about development issues that they've had. They've never had a plan, right?
No.
It never feels like there's a plan for the St. Louis Cardinals. It's hard for us to pinpoint the plan as we've been talking on this podcast for this season. So I think it can be a success. Though Walker was supposed to be the guy, at least if he ends up becoming league average or he doesn't even get to that spot, at least you know at the end of the year. And I think that's what's most important.
So I like that you brought up Nootbaar and Herrera. You said all of the things that I would have brought up as well. I think their bats play, right? You could potentially develop 3 of your top 4 spots in the lineup with those 2 players plus Wilson Contreras.
Yeah.
So you feel pretty good about that. You could have Nootbaar batting leadoff, Herrera batting second, maybe Contreras is your cleanup hitter. We need a 3-hole hitter. Yeah. I don't know who that guy's going to be. Maybe it ends up being J.J. Weatherholtz down the road. That's the hope, at least. And now you start to build from there. But that would be highly valuable for this team if they can get that out of those 2 players. You didn't mention 2 others, though, that I would bring up on the position player side of things. And I do think there's one pitcher that we need to talk about as well. Victor Scott, I think, plays into this. If you don't end up getting positive returns out of Gorman or Walker this season, but you do out of Nootbaar with the on-base, Herrera as an all-around hitter, Scott who can bring that athleticism, center field defense, and a little bit more pop than people might expect, okay, now you're really starting to develop something. And if you get all of those three things, with Mason Wynn backing up what he did a year ago and doing what Gorman failed to do, what Carlson failed to do, what Walker failed to do, what we have seen so many different times where a guy will come in, have a great first season, and then falls off a cliff in year two, now you've got half of your lineup. And you're looking at it and you're like, okay, these guys are young. They just produced in a meaningful way. Most of them are pretty athletic for their respective positions. All right, we've got a little something here. And then you add in a Quinn Matthews who might be able to join this rotation midway through the year, develop into a mid-rotation or upper half of the rotation starter. All right, man, you go into 2026 and you're thinking to yourself, if you're Chaim Bloom, I can build around this. This is a team that, yes, we had a weird transition. The messaging was off. Fans were down on the team. But now we've got some athleticism at the bottom of the order. We've got some hype around some of our young prospects. J.J. Weatherholt took another step this year. Quinn Matthews and Sonny Gray is a really nice 1-2 punch at the front end of the rotation. Now we can use some of those excess position players, whether it's Burleson, Gorman, whomever, and we can trade them, flip them for either prospects or go get another thing that you need. Maybe you decide we need a number 3 starter. Gorman could be the piece that helps you in a package. Go acquire that number 3 starter going into next year. So I think it can be a successful year, but it would have to come in one roundabout way because this season, about 6 months ago, was supposed to be all about Walker and Gorman. And now we're talking about it and thinking to ourselves, man, they feel like they're trying to minimize the role for both of those players. It feels like some of the decisions that they have made in the last week were about those two in not having faith. Victor Scott, well, it's coming at his expense, Nolan Gorman. Hey, we need to bring Michael Ciani. What do we think that was about? Do you think they're just randomly adding Michael Ciani? No, they're bringing Michael Ciani because they still don't trust Jordan Walker in late innings when they're up to be in the game defensively. So I do think this is a very realistic path that the season could go down, and it's not the way anybody would expect it to go, and I think it would be hard to wrap your mind around it being a success without those two being a big part of it. But I do think there's a way that it could happen.
Yeah, I agree. And I think when you're talking about that, long as you get to the end point of, hey, we developed a guy that we think can hit in the middle of our order, like Herrera, for example. He's probably if he hits in the middle of your order, he's not the typical write him in pen 30 home run, 100 RBI guy. He's probably more doubles than he is home runs, but he drives in runs, right? Doubles matter when guys are on base because a ball in the gap can score a guy from first base, especially if it's Scott.
Exactly. Scott and Wynn being the players that are at the bottom of your order right now. If you've got Herrera coming up, and at this point in time, maybe he's batting second for you, well, yeah, he's going to get a lot of opportunities with speed on the base path.
100%. And to me, it is about, okay, when you look at the end point of the season, the thing that you have to ask yourself is, okay, do we have two guys that can hit with Wilson Contreras in this lineup? And that's why we mentioned Walker. It's why we mentioned Herrera. It could be Nootbaar, but he's probably better suited for that leadoff spot. It could be Burleson, honestly. Burleson could be a guy that you look at and go, man, he doesn't hit for home run power. He's a doubles machine, too, because he hits for contact. If you get to the end of the season, you can answer those two questions of who's the guys that are in the middle of the order with Wilson Contreras moving for the next 2 to 3 years, then you can say it was a success. That doesn't mean it has to be Jordan Walker. This doesn't just have to be about one individual player has to have success and for the Cardinals season to be a success of Jordan Walker. It'd be nice because he's probably the most toolsy of all those guys, but it is all about looking at the end point and saying, okay, did we get answers on these spots? Because to your point, if you look at it in your Chaim Bloom and go, okay, Herrera's middle of the order bat, maybe nobody else is there, so we've got Contreras, we've got Herrera. Where's that third guy coming from? That's when you can look at and say, whether it's trading for a starter, trading for a middle of the order of the bat, which we've seen the Cardinals organization do in the past, that's when you can start to unload some of the assets that Chaim Bloom can look at and say, that guy doesn't play into our future.
All right, so all of this is stuff that you're probably going to be evaluating a lot over the course of the first month of the season. And I think this is one of the more underrated storylines going into the year for the St. Louis Cardinals. You look at what they did 2 years ago, that disastrous 2023 campaign. They started out the year 10-24. It was over. Every single person and their mother in St. Louis knew this team's done, and it was a disaster. Last year, it didn't matter that they ended up getting back to 500 by the end of the year because they were 15-24 to start out the season. And again, everybody was out. This team so desperately needs to find a way to give you something to believe in early on in the season. I'm a Mizzou fan. That's my college team of choice. And in the Barry Odom era, it felt like every year you would get your teeth kicked in the first month during the non-con slate, to the point where I was like, man, I don't care that you went 6-6 this season. The way you went 6-6, you lost to Wyoming in the season opener, dude. Or you found a way early on in the season to fumble a game away against South Carolina or Kentucky, these peer programs from Mizzou. So by the end of the year, I just don't care. Fans were out before the season ever really began. And that's what it's been over the last 2 seasons for the Cardinals. They get into the year, they show you that they're not worthy of your time, and you give up on them and call for everybody to be fired and for all of the players to be replaced, because it's not an enjoyable experience to watch a bad product, especially when they're so far behind the 8 ball, there's no way they can get back. So this year, and I remember last year, T-Bone, we talked to people around the Cardinals, and they'd be like, man, we got to open it with the Dodgers. That first stretch of games, 4 against LA, 3 against San Diego, that could really put us under. And they were worried about it, genuinely worried about what that first week of the season could do to their season. Well, they ended up going 2-1 against San Diego, and they won 1 against LA, which...
That's a big victory.
Not great, but look at what the Cubs just did against LA over in Tokyo. Like, you'll take it.
Yeah.
You'll take it. And at least they were competitive in a few of those games. But then it all came crashing down after that. This year, the first month of the season, I know it sounds so simplistic and reductive. But, dude, if this team can get out of the first month with a winning record, it does so much for them with this fan base that has been out before the season even seemingly begins in recent years. They've got to find a way to get out to a better start.
Yeah, I agree with you. Now, I don't know what it's going to take for the fan base to get back in on this team, because, I mean, we've seen it on air when looking at the text line. And, I don't blame Cardinals Nation. It doesn't even look like they may not even sell out the home opener. But I don't even know if the first month really gets them invested. They have to start above 500 for you to start to get some of those thought processes to kick in for fans, because that first month of the season, we agree on this. There's weird-ish that happens, right? The Pirates, man, they were my darling 2 years ago.
But you know what Pirates fans were doing?
They were
excited, man.
And that's the thing. I think there will be some excitement from the fan base. I think you will start to see them start to come out to the ballpark if they finish. I think it's got to be 5 games above 500. I think that's the goal.
To me, it's not even about you've got to buy in. It's about not giving them every reason not to believe. It's about, if you're the Cardinals, you just don't want people to check out on you prior to Memorial Day. That is the most important thing, because the last 2 years, we get to mid-May, man, people are done. Summer has not begun, and it's over for Cardinals fans here in St. Louis, and there's no way to get them back on board. I think if you get to May and you're a little above 500 and the young guys are playing pretty well, Victor Scott's showing you some stuff, Ivan Herrera can hit, like, you've got some reasons to believe, and then you start looking down in the farm system. It's like, okay, hey, Quinn Matthews is doing pretty well down there in AAA. Maybe he's getting closer to the big league level. Like, there's ways you could eventually talk yourself into it. But to me, the first month, first 6 weeks, it's about just not giving fans a reason to shut the door on the season. More so even than it is about convincing them this is the year that we're going to get back into the playoff mix.
See, and I think what makes this tough is I think the door's already shut. Like, I think we're already here. I mean, we're, 2 days away from the home opener, Cardinals opening day. All the headlines previously have been, hey, they haven't sold out the home opener. And if I'm being honest, doesn't it feel like the home opener's kind of snuck up on you?
Yeah.
Because, we were talking in the office today, are we going to go in the press box for the home opener? And, it's totally slipped our mind. And I think, and maybe that's just us, we're getting old.
Some of it, too, is the games have been on. Spring training games are on during our show.
Sure,
and
but
many
typically
of them have
years
not been
past, I
televised.
haven't felt this way.
That's fair.
Years past, I've been like, man, I'm excited for the Cardinals season getting underway. I think they've already lost the fan base. So that's why I say...
Let's explore this a bit. Is that because there are so many questions with this team?
I think so. I think they have... I don't know how you feel. I think they have the largest potential swing in outcomes from what their ceiling and floor looks like that I can remember, and I don't know how long. Because I think they can
apparently
lose.
2023 was that way, but it didn't feel that way going into the season. I didn't see the floor dropping out on them the way that it did, but that was pitching related. I agree with you. I think that if you're somebody that's listening to this right now and you say to yourself, man, this team stinks. There's no way they win more than 75 games. I would disagree with you, but can they win 70 games? Yeah, this team could win 70 games this year. I see how that ends up being part of their range of outcomes. But the opposite is also true for me. If you're somebody that's optimistic on this team and you believe they can win 90 games, I think that's probably pretty lofty given what I see for them. But you don't play in a good division. You could get some positive returns, as we've been talking about, from some of these young players. Maybe Quinn Matthews does just pitch his way to the big league level quicker than I'm anticipating. And maybe McGreevy does the same thing. And maybe Liberator ends up being better than I expect him to be. And what we saw in spring is real. And suddenly he's figured it out. He wouldn't be the first guy that took a little longer than expected as a left-handed arm to figure it out in the rotation. So, like, if those things happen, can they win 90? Yeah. That's a crazy range, dude.
Yeah.
They could win 70 or 90. There's like maybe 7 teams in baseball that have that kind of a range of outcomes. Most teams, you're going to be somewhere, barring injury, you're going to be somewhere in like a 5 to 7 game radius, you would think.
And that's what I was going to say. I don't know if there's a team in baseball that has that range, because typically when you have those biggest swings, it is the 23 Cardinal season where you look up and it's like, man, our pitching just fell off of a cliff. Guys weren't healthy. Guys didn't have command. And those are things you don't profile, because typically you're right. It's about 5 to 7 is what the difference is between what your floor and your ceiling is. I don't feel that way about this team, because I can see this team being a 70-win team. I can see this team winning 87 to 90. And I think that's why there is kind of this checkout phase for Cardinals baseball fans, because when you think about the Cardinals, it is supposed to be, okay, I know this team's winning 85 games. By the trade deadline, you look at them and go, okay, they're probably a 90-win team and they're making the playoffs. Now, what their ceiling is in the playoffs, who knows? But that's kind of the feeling, and you're excited about that because you know you're going to see competitive baseball all season long. And I think this fan base is looking at this going, one, this wasn't an offseason that we were used to, which was we didn't spend a penny in free agency until spring training was almost over.
Yeah.
And then you look at it and you go, okay, these are a bunch of young guys. Well, we're used to seeing superstars on the St. Louis Cardinals. Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Arenado, Pujols is back and playing like a star. When I was growing up, it was Matt Holliday, Matt Carpenter were the guys that were kind of leading the charge for the Cardinals. And you're not getting that from them. And because you don't really know what to think about them going into the season, of what you think their true win total is, and a lot of people are leaning towards the downside, that's why I say, like, the first month, I think it takes 5 games being above 500 for some people to start to come back. I don't think you'll see the fan base really flock to Busch Stadium again unless this team can sustain success for 2 months. And I don't know if they can do that. I think they are going to be riding the flows of about 500 for a decent chunk of the season.
Let's get into our predictions. We'll close out on this first episode of the Redbird Report podcast. What is your overall record prediction for the Cardinals in 2025? We've given a lot of the background as to where we're coming from on some of these young players, how they've arrived at this point. What is your record prediction for the St. Louis Cardinals in 2025?
I think the Cardinals end up going 74-88. I think they end up with the same record that the Blue Jays had last year. And you look at that Blue Jays team, they had okay pitching, which I think is kind of the outcome for the Cardinals. They had a bullpen that wasn't very good. And I'm skeptical of this bullpen for the Cardinals. And you look at that offense, and it was really just Vlad Guerrero Jr. And I think that's what the Cardinals are. I think it's Wilson Contreras is the only guy there. You get one other piece. I think Herrera will have a good year. I really do believe that. But if you're not hitting for power, which is the thing that I am just very out on this Cardinals team, I don't think you're a good baseball team. And I think they will kind of fluctuate around 500. And then I think they fall out of it. They trade off assets at the deadline, and then they really fall off in the last 2 months of baseball that people just don't care about. I think they go 74-88.
I think they will be a better team than they were last year. And I think they will have a slightly worse record than they were last year.
This feels like when I was going to say, when you started to say that and were looking at me, I was going, this feels like when we talked about the Blues.
Yeah. I think there's a chance that they end up going 86 and 76. That feels in their range of outcomes. I think that if things go better than most people expect, that's probably where I see them going. For me, like the median outcome, the thing that I think is most likely for the Cardinals this year, 82 and 80. And one of the reasons why I'm probably higher on them than what you just mentioned, and you did the comparison to Toronto, and I think it's a fair one. It's an interesting one. They played in very different divisions.
Sure.
The AL East is much better than the division in which the Cardinals will be participating this year. The Central Division just boosts your floor up so much to me. I think all of these teams are the Spider-Man meme. I think the Cubs out of them are the team that I think is the best of the bunch. And it really just comes down to, hey, they added Kyle Tucker and nobody else added much of anything this offseason. I think people might be slightly underestimating what the Milwaukee Brewers lost from this past season. Willy Adames was a hell of a player for them, man. And they, once again, pulled from that bullpen. Bullpens can be very fragile when you pull away the most important piece. They had 2 of them, and then they had 1 of them, and now they have none of those. So I think the Brewers are a little more fragile this year than they have been in recent seasons. They also have good young players, and they catch the hell out of the baseball. So I don't think the floor is going to drop out for them, but I think 82, 84 wins could very much be in play for Milwaukee. I think that's roughly the range that the Cardinals will be in as well.
And I will say this, because it is fair when you mentioned the Blue Jays and where their division is, because they are in that unbelievable AL East. When you look at the Cardinals, and if you have the fear that I have, which is this offense is not going to hit for power, and if that's the case, I just don't know if you're scoring runs. Think about the pitching in the Central, man. I mean, the Cubs have got a decent rotation. You got Steele, you got Imanaga. They upgraded their bullpen. Milwaukee's pitching is Freddie Peralta, but I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt.
They're always going to be solid.
Somehow they made it through last year.
They'll have a guy that I've never heard of that'll end up with a 4 ERA.
And then you look at the Pirates, and it's like, well, they've got a 3-headed monster in Skeens, Jones, and Mitch Keller. And then who's the team I'm forgetting?
The Reds.
Oh, the Reds. And they've got Hunter Green, and they've got some intriguing arms. Like, okay, so I agree the NL Central's not very good, but that's some really good rotations. Like, to me, you might have the worst rotation in the bunch in the NL Central, if not tied for Milwaukee for last in the way I look at it. And if you're out on the offense
Cincinnati.
like me,
I think those 3 are kind of at the bottom, but yeah.
That's fair. They've got the one stud in Hunter Green that's unbelievable.
I think you have Sonny, and we'll see. If his spring is real, then you've got a problem.
But that's where I would say I can see where the NL Central becomes a problem for the St. Louis Cardinals.
The best hitter not named Wilson Contreras in the 2025 Cardinals will be who?
I think it's Ivan Herrera. I think we're probably on the same page there. I mean, you just look at his profile, man. He hits for average. He's going to get on base. And I think there's more power in his bat than what he showed last year. I don't think it's home run power. I think it's going to be doubles. I think he's going to be hitting in the top 5 of your lineup within a month of the season because they're going to look at him and go, we've got to get him up there.
I think very soon you'll be saying Contreras, Herrera, Arenado should be your 2, 3, 4. And it wouldn't surprise me if Arenado people are asking for him to be moved. They won't move him because we've seen this before. He's a veteran. He likes hitting in the cleanup spot. It's going to take a while for him to be moved out of that cleanup spot once again, but at least that 1, 2, 3. Newt, Contreras, and Herrera, I think that's probably going to be the top 3 that they want up there, and then figure it out from there. Everybody else is a battle for 5 through 9. I agree with you. Herrera will be the second best hitter on the Cardinals in 2025. The player that you think will change their outlook the most, based on the way that they perform in 2025, who do you think that player is?
I think it might be Nootbaar. I think he's due for a healthy season, and, you know, as a guy that likes to gamble, you shouldn't do the due factor. But he feels due for a healthy year. He stays healthy. I think fans will learn to appreciate Nootbaar because he'll be on base. If he's on base, you know what that means? Contreras, who we agree is going to be the best hitter on the Cardinals, is probably driving him in, and then you're probably having some level of success. So I think the guy for me is Nootbaar. He changes the perspective, and fans, not that I don't think they want him out of town, rain out of town like they do Gorman. I think there's frustration by how the front office has portrayed him. I think you finally start to see that happen this season.
I like that one. It's one that I would have potentially gone with. I've got 2, and I've got them for different reasons. One is, I'll just throw it out there real quick. Wilson Contreras. I think Wilson Contreras has a chance to change the mind of Cardinals fans to see him as a star. Like, he could be a guy that finishes the year with 30 home runs, an OPS above 800, like 850 plus, and you leave the season, you're like, oh, that's William Contreras. What William Contreras did a year ago, Wilson Contreras is now doing it, and he's at a position that makes more sense for him, so you're not accentuating all of his flaws. You're now just getting, hey, we got a badass first baseman that can go out there and slug the hell out of the baseball. That feels in his range of outcomes. The other guy that I would bring up here, though, another guy that could be playing some first, Alec Burleson. I think Alec Burleson, people forget how good he was in the first half of the season last year. That's still in there, man. And his profile is one where he's going to go through slumps because he's going to swing at everything. And he's going to get swing happy sometimes. It ends up with him swinging at pitches that he shouldn't be. He makes contact with everything, which means he makes bad contact a lot of the time. And in the second half of the season, that's what got him into trouble. First half, 17 home runs in 89 games. Second half, 4 home runs in 63. If you can get more of that first half Alec Burleson, it's not a star, but it's a damn good player, man. A guy that can hit 30 home runs in a season. I wouldn't project him for that, but again, 17 and 89 projects for right around 30 over the course of a full 162-game schedule. So I think it's entirely possible Alec Burleson this year sees more of what he did at the beginning of last year, that first half where he was great for the Cardinals, And if they get that out of him, I think Cardinals fans will look at it and say, that's a guy that has to be in our lineup and should be batting at least in the top 5 every day for the next 5 years.
Yeah, I like those too. The one thing that will be interesting for those guys, and I think this plays for Herrera too. I mean, it's what held him out of the lineup last year. Will Cardinals fans appreciate it if they aren't good defensively and they don't have a defensive position? Like you mentioned Contreras, I don't know how Cardinals fans aren't in on him yet because, I mean, he's an incredible bat. One, he hasn't stayed healthy, which I can get that one. That's the same argument against Newbar. But two, he wasn't good defensively behind the plate, and that became a big issue. And when you think about first base, think about the first basemen that have been here in St. Louis. They are great, elite first basemen defensively. Pujols was awesome defensively. You had Keith Hernandez in the 80s. You had, after Albert, the weird stretch of Jose Martinez. But then you had Paul Goldschmidt, who was great defensively. And I wonder if some of that will play into the way Cardinals fans view them. And especially now that you mentioned Burley. Burley's the DH right now. How do Cardinals fans like the DH spot, and how do they value that?
Ultimately, if you're producing runs, you're coming through in the clutch, Cardinals fans are going to support you, and I think Burleson has a chance to do exactly that this year. All right, this is round number 1, episode number 1 of the new Redbird Report podcast. He's Tanner Henderickson. I'm Brandon Kiley. We're going to be doing this every single week. Be sure to tell your friends about us. You can find us wherever you find your podcast. Be sure to subscribe to that. If you want to watch us instead, we are indeed available on YouTube, youtube.com/101ESPN STL. So we've got the video podcast. We've got the audio format for you guys as well. Again, we'll be doing this every single week throughout the season. Might be giving you some live feeds as well after some of these games, if that is something that you guys would be interested in. So thank you so much for listening today. We will talk to you guys with our reaction to the first week of the Cardinal season next week here on the Redbird Report. With T-Bone, I'm BK. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Find every episode of the Redbird Report with Brandon Kiley and Tanner Henderickson on YouTube or at 101ESPN.com.